How can the left be defeated? I'm often asked how to defeat the left. This is a good question, but unfortunately it's one that individualists and people on the right often get wrong, because all they can do is think about politics in economic terms. In this video I am going to dissect the way that the modern left think about politics and explain how it requires a new way of thinking for free market advocates if the left is going to be defeated once and for all. Karl Marx is at the heart of everything that the modern left stands for, because his interpretation of culture has had such a huge influence on their ideology. Some call Karl Marx an economist, but this is not accurate in the true sense of the word. An economist explains how markets work, but Marx's entire ideology rejects the very idea of a market in favour of a centrally planned economic model where goods could be distributed around society based on need. But how did Marx think such a society could be realised? Some suggest that cultural Marxism came about after World War I, when this conflict failed to lead to the working class uprising against the ruling class that Marx predicted. But technically this isn't true. Marx always focused on culture. In fact, he was obsessed with it because he had certain ideas about what a communist society would be like, and this was almost exclusively driven by cultural values. You don't have to read volume after volume of Marx's boring Das Kapital to realise this. It's right there in chapter 2 of the short but revealing Communist Manifesto. In any case, Das Kapital was predominantly about explaining how communist economics would work, even though there is nothing about communism that can accurately be called economics. So if Marxism has always been about culture, how did Marx lay out his cultural critique? Marx criticised the culture that came out of the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution. He believed that a new class of oppressors emerged from this era. Some call these people the bourgeois, but today we'd simply call them the middle class. During this era, for the first time in history, a section of society was able to become wealthy with no help from the ruling class, and these opportunities were the culmination of centuries of hard-fought individual liberties, such as the Magna Carta and laissez-faire economics. Incredibly, Marx hated this culture with a passion, much of which can be explained by his own idleness and the way that his own privileged family background was no longer an advantage in this society. In this culture, social mobility was high, and you didn't need anything more than a talent for trade and business to succeed. This enraged the elites of old, because they no longer possessed the advantages they had in feudal society. So Marx and others like him began to turn the workers against the emerging middle class by using the politics of envy. Marx believed that there was no way to create his new communist society unless he destroyed the existing culture, and he manufactured an entire mythology to explain how society would transition to his utopia. This was based around a theory of history and 6 stages of society. Marx referred to the first stage as primitive communism. He held this society in high esteem, since property didn't exist and there were no leaders. Of course, none of this is strictly true. Humans have always had items that could technically be defined as property, and there's little to no evidence that hierarchy never existed amongst humans, even if it's just elders leading tribes or children being subservient to adults, particularly parents. The second stage was a slave society, which Marx saw as a direct result of the emergence of agriculture, statism, and class in particular, which he then argued led to the rise of property. None of this is true either, since, as already explained, property has always existed in some shape or form. The third stage is feudalism, where, according to Marx, the ideas of a slave society become more deeply entrenched, namely the nation-state and class, particularly through aristocracy and hereditary rule. But in this stage he goes one step further by suggesting that religious rule became very common in this period, although all cultures have some focus on spirituality, especially primitive tribes that Marxists often celebrate. The fourth stage was capitalism, which Marx despised for its alleged exploitation of workers selling their labour to factory owners. Once again, this is a simplistic version of history, and perhaps the greatest reason why Marx was so wrong when predicting the downfall of capitalism. Marx then predicted the fifth stage would lead to socialism, where the working class would gain a consciousness and gradually take power from the middle class, leading to more centralization of the economy and ever greater redistribution of wealth. In the final stage, violent revolution would lead to communism. This society would be the perfection of primitive communism, where all property would be communally owned and people were free to pursue any activities and employment they saw fit in their day-to-day lives, as long as it didn't involve private property and anything that contradicted communist culture. As we can see, Marx was very much a cultural critic. For communism to succeed, Marx believed culture had to be completely controlled by society. This meant that national borders had to be eradicated, because according to Marx, this led to private property and class. Religion also had to go, because Marx believed this created obedience from the workers, preventing them from rising up against their masters. The family had no place in this society either, because Marx believed that women were treated as property by men and children were exploited by their parents. Instead, adults would generally lead polyamorous lives and children would be raised and educated communally. Marx therefore had a very clear plan when it came to the eradication of what he called bourgeois culture. It's true that Marx's theories on class consciousness were expanded by others later on, to include practically anything that could weaken and undermine the principles of the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution. This is how race and sexual lifestyle are such a significant part of modern Marxist theory, though national identity and sex were always a part of Marxist thought. Thankfully, what many would call economic Marxism has been completely discredited in both theory and practice. But cultural Marxism has always existed, even if this is often attributed to the Frankfurt School. Cultural Marxism is also as strong as ever today, if not stronger, and much of this is down to the fact that leftists hide their cultural agenda from the public, because they know that most people would be outraged if they knew that leftists want to subvert culture and build their utopia from the ashes of the old society. So, going back to the original question, how can the left be defeated? The answer is by protecting your culture. If you don't do this, or you take people seriously who advocate free markets but couldn't give a damn about culture, then it's only a matter of time before communists weaken society so much that they begin to take over. Marx knew it, the modern left know it, and anyone with an ounce of common sense can see that culture is the foundation of a stable and free society. This is RockingMrE, over and out.
Don't forget to like or dislike this video, add it to your favorites or share it if you really liked it, leave a comment below, feel free to follow me on Twitter and AskFM, and don't forget to subscribe to see future videos. Until then, take care and Godspeed.